Hello everyone, my name's Mitchell Baker and I'm an English teacher here at Ocean Edu, Vietnam. Today we're going to be reading a book. This book is called The Day David Wasn't There. It is a level 3 book. As you'll see, it's a pre-intermediate level and it's from the Learning Through Reading collection. Alright, let's start reading, shall we? Chapter 1. This is odd. One morning, David woke up to find himself invisible. He looked in the mirror and saw nothing but a comb hanging in the air. He looked down at himself and saw nothing. This is odd, he thought. Well, there was no point in combing his hair. He shrugged and set down the comb. David went downstairs for breakfast. "Good morning, Mum." Mum was facing the sink and did not see him. She turned around and still did not see him. "David!" She looked under the table. David's little sister, Katie, came into the kitchen. "What are you looking for?" "David," said Mum. "I'm here," said David. "I'm invisible." David waved his hand, but of course, it was no use. They couldn't see him or any part of him.
"How did that happen?" asked Mom.
She looked towards David's chair. "I don't know," said David. "I was like this when I woke up." Mum and Katie watched the milk carton float up and pour milk on David's cereal. Katie pouted. "How come he gets to be invisible?" Mum smiled and handed both children their lunch bags. Katie took hers. Then David took his. For a moment, Katie and Mum stared at David's lunch bag, hanging in the air.
Then Mom cleared her throat. "Be extra careful crossing the street," she said.
"The cars can't see you, you know." On the school bus, David sat next to Katie. Kids kept sitting on David. At first, it was funny. Then David got annoyed. He had to push a girl off. "Hey, get off! This seat is taken," he shouted. "Well, excuse me. How was I supposed to know someone invisible was sitting there?" "It's not as if I can see you," said the girl. Katie giggled. In his classroom, David headed for his teacher's desk. "Mrs. Cooper?" "Yes, David?" She was reading something. "I'm invisible today." Mrs. Cooper looked up. "David!" "I'm here." He picked up a paper and fluttered it to show where he was. "Oh dear," said Mrs. Cooper. "Is that going around again? Well, take your seat." When the bell rang and Mrs. Cooper took attendance, one of the girls said that David was absent. "No, Ashley, he is not absent. David is invisible today," said Mrs. Cooper.
All the kids turned to look at David. Of course, they saw nothing.
"Here," David said. "It's a trick," said Ashley. "No," said David. "It just seems like a trick because you've never seen an invisible person before." Chapter 3. the pencil. The class began with history, David's favourite subject. He knew the answers to all Mrs. Cooper's questions, but Mrs. Cooper never called on him because she could not see his hand raised. David rolled his pencil back and forth, feeling ignored and crabby. Wasn't there anything he could do about this? He rolled his pencil. That was it. He raised his pencil, and Mrs. Cooper called on him. As long as he held his pencil, everyone knew he was there. All went well until after lunch. Mr. Cruz was on the playground duty. No pencils on the playground, he said. David tried to explain, but Mr. Cruz was strict. I don't care how invisible you are, he said. Either give me the pencil or sit out. David hated being invisible so much that he walked towards the bench by the door. Behind him, he heard John say, "May I go out with him?" John caught up with David and they sat down on the bench together. It cheered David up to have John with him. Chapter 4. The Cap. After a minute, John said, "Hey, try this." He took off his batter's baseball cap and put it on David. "That won't work. My clothes disappeared with me," said David. "Your own clothes disappeared with you," said John. "But this is my hat. Try it."
As soon as David put on John's baseball cap, John shouted, "I can still see it." "You can?" John nodded.
"You better wear it until you're back to normal." David knew how much John liked that hat. "Thanks," he told him. John gave Mr. Cruz the pencil and ran onto the playground. David wore John's baseball cap for the rest of the day. When the school bell rang at 2:30 p.m, David thought he should give the cap back to John. He handed the cap to his friend. "Thanks, John," he said. "You better take your cap back." "It's okay," John said. "I think right now you need it more than I do." David waved goodbye. He wondered why John wasn't waving back. "Oops," he smiled. How would John know he was waving when he could not see him? "Bye," shouted David. "See you tomorrow." "Bye," replied John. "I hope I do see you tomorrow." Chapter 5. I Can See Me. The next morning, when David woke up, he lifted his hand. There were his fingers. "I can see me," David smiled. After he got dressed, David put the batter's baseball cap in his backpack to return to John. Hopping down the stairs, he wondered if invisibility was catching. Would John become invisible next? David raced upstairs and grabbed his Titan's baseball cap, just in case. Wow, that was a very nice story. Did you like this story? I hope so. You can find more books just like this at the Learning Through Reading collection. Bye everyone. Hope to see you next time. In this book, there are some difficult words that you may have pronunciation difficulties with. Here are some of them. Shrugged. Shrugged. He shrugged and set down the comb. Another word that we found difficulty pronouncing in this book is on the next page. This word is invisible. Invisible. I'm invisible. David waved his hand. But of course, it was no use. They couldn't see him or any part of him. Another word that we may have troubles saying and pronouncing is on a few more pages. Let's take a look. Our next word is fluttered. He picked up a paper and fluttered it to show where he was. On the following page, there's another word you may have difficulty pronouncing. This word is attendance. When the bell rang and Mrs. Cooper took attendance, one of the girls said that David was absent. Attendance. On the following few pages, there is another word called batters. After a minute, John said, "Hey, try this." He took off his batter's baseball cap and put it on David. Batters. Another word you may find some difficulty with is disappeared. Disappeared. "Your own clothes disappeared with you," said John. "But this is my hat. Try it." In the book, we practice pronunciation with a few of the difficult words. I hope you can practice at home by reviewing and practicing these words in your own time. Goodbye, everyone.